It's a perfect morning, isn't it, Max? The kind that reminds you there's more to the world than what people choose to see. Well, look who we have here. The Queen of the Blind Brigade and her noble mutt. What's the matter, lady? Too scared to walk without your furry babysitter? It's funny how the loudest voices often have the least to say. Oh, listen to her. She's got a backbone. I'm just saying, must be nice to have a dog to do all your thinking for you. Max doesn't think for me. He guides me. And he does it with more courage and dignity than you've likely known in your life. Come on, Jake, don't let her get to you. She's just playing tough. Playing tough? Nah. I think she actually believes it. Tell me, lady, how does it feel knowing people only pretend to respect you out of pity? Pity is what people like you cling to when you can't understand strength. I don't need your respect. I have my own, and that's more than enough. She talks big for someone hiding behind a dog. Hiding? No. Max is a part of me. He's my partner, not my shield. Whatever you say, lady. Keep hiding behind your dog. Leave her alone. She's done nothing to you. You see blindness, but I see more than you ever will. And Max? He's not just a guide. He's a reminder that loyalty and strength don't need words to be heard. Yeah, well, whatever. Whatever helps you sleep at night. Let's go, guys. Max, stay close. Come on, boy. Let's go home. The sound of motorcycle engines roared, cutting through the calm evening air like a storm. Clara's heart pounded in her chest as she felt the vibrations through the ground. The bikers were here. She could sense them before they even spoke, the weight of their presence like an oppressive shadow falling over her. Max, ever steady at her side, shifted slightly, his large frame tensing, but he didn't move. His quiet confidence was all Clara needed to feel the warmth of protection radiate from him. A voice broke through the air, harsh and mocking. Well, look what we got here, a man's voice sneered, followed by the harsh rev of a bike engine. A blind girl and her dog. You lost or just stupid? Clara's grip on Max's harness tightened, her fingers curling around the leather, feeling the familiar texture. She knew this routine. The insults, the sneers, the attempts to degrade her. But Max had always been her strength. No one would break her with their words. I'm fine, Clara replied calmly, her voice firm, though a faint tremor in her chest betrayed the surge of anger building inside her. I'm not lost. The bikers circled them, engines growling like wild animals. They were closing in, boxing Clara in with their bulky motorcycles. Max stood tall beside her, ears alert, his body stiff with readiness. Clara could feel him, like a pulse beneath her hand, calm, but always ready. You sure about that, sweetheart? Another voice jeered, laughter following. Max, Clara whispered, her voice barely above a breath. The dog's ears flicked in response, his eyes locked on the bikers. Clara wasn't afraid of them. She had learned to stand strong in the face of prejudice, to never let the world's cruelty define her. But there was a sting in these moments in the way people looked at her, as though her blindness made her weak. The way society always expected her to shrink, to back down. It hadn't always been this way, though. As a child, she had tried to navigate the world of sighted people, the world that wasn't built for her. She remembered being in school, sitting in the back of the classroom, her hand raised, eager to answer a question, but never called on. She'd been just another kid with a disability, her needs pushed aside for the ease of others. I know what you're thinking, her mother had once said, her voice warm but filled with the burden of truth. You're stronger than they think. You don't need to prove anything to anyone. But Clara had always felt the need to prove herself. She was capable. She was intelligent. She didn't need to rely on anyone, not even her mother. And she certainly didn't need to let these bikers dictate how her story would unfold. Max was her constant. Through every moment of doubt, he had never once left her side. He had been there through every public moment when people would stare or make assumptions. Together, they had faced the world, and together they would stand against it. The man in front of them revved his engine again, and this time, it wasn't just a taunt. The sound was sharp, a clear threat. "You really think you can just walk around here, actin' like you're one of us?" he spat, his voice dripping with disdain. "Just 'cause you got a dog doesn't mean you're untouchable." Clara swallowed, feeling her pulse quicken. She wasn't sure if it was the biker's words or the dangerous energy that was quickly escalating, but she knew something had to give. "Back off," she said, trying to sound assertive. "I'm not interested in your games." One of the bikers laughed, a low, rumbling sound that felt like it echoed through her bones. "What's the dog gonna do, huh? You think that mutt can stop us?" Max growled, a deep rumbling sound that sent a shiver down Clara's spine. It was low, menacing, but controlled. He wasn't going to let them push them any further. "You're wrong," Clara said quietly, but the words carried with a surprising weight. "I don't need him to stop you. I'm perfectly capable of handling myself." For a moment, the bikers were silent, thrown off by her response. But then the laughter returned, cruel and unyielding. "You think you're tough," one of them mocked. "You're just some blind girl. What can you possibly know about the world?" Clara's chest tightened. She had heard that line before, too many times. "You don't know anything about me," she said, her voice unwavering. "You don't know anything about my life, my struggles, my strength. You don't get to decide who I am." Max shifted beside her, sensing her rising anger. He nudged her hand, a silent reminder of the bond they shared. Clara felt the weight of her own words sinking in, the fire building up inside her. She was done letting others define her. She thought back to the times in her life when she had been overlooked, when people had refused to give her a chance because of her blindness. She remembered standing in job interviews, listening to people tell her she wasn't what they were looking for, as though her disability was an automatic disqualification. She remembered trying to attend college, only to be told that accommodations would be too much trouble. But she had kept fighting. She had kept pushing forward. "I've faced more than you'll ever know," Clara said, her voice full of quiet defiance. "And I'll keep facing it. Every day. You won't stop me." Max stepped forward then, his posture proud and commanding. The bikers shifted back slightly, eyes widening at the dog's presence. They didn't know what he had done, didn't understand the depth of his loyalty and courage. They didn't know that Max had saved lives, led rescue missions, and been the backbone of more than one successful operation in the past. All they saw was a dog, a pet. Clara felt a wave of pride surge through her. Max wasn't just a companion, he was her strength. And no one could take that away from them. The bikers hesitated, unsure of how to proceed. The silence between them thickened. Clara's words had struck deeper than any insult could have. "You're wasting your time," she said finally, her voice cool and resolute. "We're leaving." The bikers exchanged a look, one of them muttering something under his breath. But none of them moved to stop them. Max led Clara away, their footsteps in sync, the tension still hanging in the air but slowly dissipating as they walked further down the road. Clara felt the weight of the moment lift, just a little. She wasn't just walking away from them, she was walking toward something greater, toward herself, toward her own strength. She had faced their hate, their ignorance, and she had walked through it with her head held high. And for once, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the world would start seeing her as she saw herself. The engines roared again, louder this time, as Jake throttled his bike and drove it toward Max. Clara's grip tightened on the harness, but Max remained still. His muscles tensed, his body sensing the shift in the air. Jake smirked, revving his engine even closer to the dog. "You think you're tough, huh?" Jake taunted, his voice dripping with condescension. "Think this dog can protect you?" Max's eyes never left the man. His posture was poised, alert, but it was Clara's sharp intake of breath that sent a ripple of warning through him. She was afraid not for herself, but for him. And in that moment, something inside Max clicked. His instincts took over. With a swift motion, Max stepped in front of Clara, his body shielding her. The bike screeched to a halt just inches from them, the engine roaring threateningly, but Max remained unmoved, a wall of calm in the chaos. Clara's heart raced, but she stayed rooted, feeling the strength of Max's protection. Jake revved his bike again, a malicious smile on his face. "You think your dog can stop me?" he mocked, spinning his wheels in defiance. But before the words could settle in the air, a child's high-pitched laughter cut through the tension. Clara's breath hitched as she heard the familiar sound of a ball bouncing on the sidewalk. A child, no older than 6, came running from a nearby yard, chasing after a bouncing ball that had rolled into the street. Clara couldn't see him, but she could hear the sound of tiny footsteps growing closer, the child completely unaware of the danger looming ahead. The bikers froze. For a split second, everything seemed to hold still. Then, the child stepped into the street just as the bike roared to life again. Time seemed to slow as Clara's heart sank. The ball was right in front of Jake's bike, and the child, that innocent life, was in the path of destruction. "Look out!" Clara cried, instinctively reaching for Max's harness. But the words were too late. Max, already attuned to Clara's fear, reacted before she could even finish her sentence. His body surged into motion, a flash of power and precision as he bolted forward, shoving Clara gently but firmly to the side and sprinting toward the child. He was a blur of muscle and speed, his training kicking in. Clara stumbled back, heart racing, but she didn't look away. She had to trust Max. Max's paws hit the pavement with urgency as he reached the child in a flash, grabbing the back of the boy's shirt in his jaws, pulling him out of the path of the bike with a strength that left no room for hesitation. The child yelped in surprise, but Max's grip was gentle, protective. The bikers watched, stunned into silence as the moment unfolded before them. The screech of the tires, the roar of the engines, and the laughter of the child all blended into one chaotic blur, but Max, calm, focused, and unstoppable, had done what no one else could in that split second. Clara rushed forward, her heart in her throat, reaching the child just as Max released him from his grasp. The boy was shaken, his eyes wide with confusion, but unharmed. "You okay?" Clara asked gently, kneeling beside him, her voice soft despite the storm of adrenaline still surging through her. The boy nodded, too scared to speak. Behind them, the bikers were still frozen, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Jake took a step back, his bravado crumbling as he looked at Max, then at Clara, a strange mixture of fear and begrudging respect flickering in his eyes. Clara rose to her feet, turning slowly to face them. She felt the tension crackling in the air, the weight of their ignorance, the judgment they had cast upon her and Max. She stood tall, her posture unwavering, the strength of the moment empowering her in ways she couldn't explain. "Do you see it now?" Clara's voice was steady, but it carried with the force of something much more profound. She could feel the heat of the moment, the power in her words. "You see blindness, but I see the world clearer than you ever will." And Max? She let the silence hang for a beat, her gaze piercing the bikers with a calm intensity. "He's more than you could ever comprehend." The words landed with the force of a slap. The bikers exchanged uncertain glances, their bravado vanishing like smoke in the wind. Jake opened his mouth, but the words caught in his throat. He had nothing to say to that. Clara stepped forward, her eyes never leaving them. You came here to harass, to intimidate. But it's not the blind who are the ones who need to be pitied. It's not the ones who have to fight for every inch of respect. It's not the ones who have to prove they belong every single day. The bikers remained silent, unable to respond. The silence stretched, heavy and thick, as Clara's words cut through the tension like a blade. It wasn't just her words, it was the truth. It was the power of resilience in the face of ignorance, the quiet strength of someone who had been knocked down time and time again but refused to stay down. Max stood beside her, his head held high, a quiet testament to the bond between them, to the strength they both carried within them. For a long moment, no one moved. The bikers seemed to deflate, their pride stripped away in the face of something they couldn't understand but couldn't deny. And Clara had said her piece. The truth hung in the air like a silent declaration, she would no longer let their prejudice define her. Max would no longer be just a dog at her side. He was a hero in his own right, and together, they were a force no one could ignore. With a final look, Clara turned, guiding the child gently away from the bikers, the sounds of the engines fading into the background. The world, once again, seemed to shift beneath her feet, but this time, it felt like a victory. The silence that followed Clara's words was thick, almost suffocating. Jake stood there, his hands still gripping the handlebars of his bike, staring at her with an expression that flickered between anger and something else, something he couldn't quite place. The other bikers, too, remained still, their bravado lost in the weight of the moment. But then, something in Jake's eyes seemed to soften. He glanced downward, almost as if retreating into himself. His face contorted, and for the first time, the harshness he wore like armor seemed to crack. He remembered. A long time ago, there had been a boy small, awkward, always trying to fit in, always getting shoved aside. He'd been one of the outcasts, the one whose skin, whose name, whose very presence felt wrong to the others. The teasing had never stopped, not even when he tried to be stronger, tougher. The words, the jeers too soft, too weak, they followed him everywhere. He could still feel the sting of it, the relentless weight of being misunderstood, of being judged by people who didn't care to see beyond the surface. And now, standing here, facing Clara, the memory of that pain was almost unbearable. He shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware of how foolish he had been, how wrong. He had been just like them, hadn't he? Judging someone he didn't understand, trying to make them feel small so he could feel bigger. And yet, Clara had stood there, unwavering in her strength. Her words, her confidence, her defiance, it had all pierced through his arrogance, through the walls he had built around himself. In the quiet that followed, Jake turned his back on Clara, walking a few paces away. The others remained silent, unsure of what to say or do. But the moment didn't need words. It was a reckoning, silent but profound. Back in town, the story of what had happened began to spread. News of Max's heroism traveled quickly, and it wasn't long before people in the community started to pay attention. The child's parents, grateful and in awe of Max's bravery, shared their story. They spoke about how Max had saved their son without hesitation, without fear. It wasn't just a tale of a dog saving a child, it became a symbol, a reminder of how one act of courage could change everything. The community began to stir with change. In the local cafe, around the dinner tables, and in the streets, people whispered about the event, about the blind woman and her dog, about the bikers who had been forced to reckon with their own prejudices. People talked about their own biases, their own judgments. It wasn't just about Clara and Max anymore, it was about everyone. Clara had no idea of the ripple effect she had caused. She didn't know that her defiant stand, her refusal to shrink in the face of hate, had inspired so many others. But the news of that day, the day that a blind woman stood her ground, the day that a dog saved a life, was the beginning of something bigger. A week later, the town's leaders gathered in the town hall, organizing an event for everyone. The goal was simple: unity. They wanted to break down the walls of misunderstanding, to foster a sense of community where everyone, regardless of their race, gender, disability, or background, could feel seen. They invited Clara to speak, to share her story. When the day of the event arrived, Clara stood before the crowd, Max by her side, her hand on the dog's harness. The crowd watched, many of them still processing the events of that day. The bikers, too, were there, Jake included, standing in the back of the room, his eyes not leaving Clara. Her voice was steady as she addressed the crowd, not just about the fight for respect and equality but about the power of understanding. She spoke of the prejudice she had faced, of the judgment that followed her all her life. But she also spoke of resilience, of the strength that came from knowing who you are and standing by it. Change, she said, doesn't happen when we fight each other. It happens when we see each other. When we stop looking at each other's labels and start seeing each other's hearts. The crowd listened in silence, absorbing the words, feeling the weight of them. For many, it was the first time they had truly considered how their actions, small or large, impacted those around them. When the event ended, people lingered, talking, reflecting. Even Jake approached Clara, his expression softer than before, the hardness in his eyes replaced with something more vulnerable. He started, his voice low. I never thought about it like that. He paused, taking a deep breath. I'm sorry. For what I did. For the way I treated you. Clara didn't say anything at first, just looked at him. For a moment, the weight of his apology hung in the air, fragile and raw. Then she nodded, her gaze unwavering. You don't have to be sorry, she said quietly. But you can change. We all can. Jake nodded, the truth of her words sinking in. It was the beginning of something new, a shift in perspective that had the potential to alter the way he saw the world. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Clara and Max walked home together. The streets were quieter now, the tension that had once loomed over them replaced with a sense of peace. The town was changing, but so were they. They had shown the world the power of resilience, of standing up in the face of prejudice, and through that strength, they had helped others find their own. The walk home felt different. It wasn't just a walk through the town, it was a walk toward a brighter future. A future where understanding, compassion, and courage were the guiding lights. And as Clara held the leash in her hand, she knew the journey wasn't over. But it was one step closer to a world where the struggles of yesterday no longer defined their tomorrow.